Thanks for that introduction, Jackie. As Jackie mentioned, today we'll be going through procurement fundamentals and doing business with the city. Just to give you an idea of the topics we'll cover today, we'll start with a small overview of the Department of Procurement Services. Then we'll talk about some of the major laws that govern the procurement process. We'll touch on some common procurement terms that you'll hear throughout the presentation. We'll go over the different types of procurement that DPS does. We'll also talk about some of the other functions within the procurement department, including what we do with certification and compliance. Then we'll give an overview of DPS's programs and bid incentives. We'll talk a little bit more about how you can maximize use of the DPS website. And then we'll finish with a chance for you to ask any questions about things that we haven't covered in the presentation today. So just to give you an overview, if you're not familiar with the department, DPS is the contracting authority for the city to procure the goods and services for the city of Chicago. So we work together as a team with our customers to guarantee an open, fair, and timely process. And we do this by establishing, communicating, and enforcing superior business practices. And then just to give you an idea of some of the main laws that govern the procurement process, in case you're looking for more information beyond today, there are two main ones you want to keep in mind. They are the Municipal Purchasing Act and the Municipal Code of Chicago, specifically Chapter 2-92 of the Municipal Code. And a good way to think of how these work together is the Municipal Code of Chicago is kind of where you get the most specific information about the procurement process in Chicago, because that's city specific. Then when you want kind of the broader strokes of the procurement process that those rules fit within, you can look to the Municipal Purchasing Act, which is the state level statute that governs procurement practices. And then our next topic is just going over a few common terms that you'll hear me use throughout this presentation to make sure we're all on the same page about what these mean. The first is bid package. So this is the set of documents that the city issues to solicit bids for goods and services. If you've done business with the city in the past, you might be familiar with the paper bid package. We've now switched to being fully electronic. So if you go on our electronic system, e-procurement, you might know it as iSupplier, you'll be able to get all your bid package information on there. The next term is addendum, and this refers to any change to the city's requirements to an invitation for bid, a request for qualification, or request for proposals. Anytime there's an addendum, it'll be uploaded to the e-procurement system. And if you've registered for the solicitation, you'll get an automatic notification that an addendum is on there. That changes the bid terms. If you're looking at a bid after an addendum has already been loaded for that solicitation, it will just automatically appear as part of the solicitation as you look at it. Then just two other terms. One is contract, and this refers to the actual written agreement between the city and vendor for the provision of goods and/or services that the vendor will provide to the city. And there's a number of different forms of contracts that the city does. And during the next part of the presentation, as we talk about the different procurement types, we'll get into specifically what those different types of contracts are. And then our last terms are just amendment or modification. And these you'll see used fairly interchangeably. And it really refers to any document that makes a formal change to the terms and conditions of the contract. So there are quite a few different forms that the amendments or modifications might take. You might see it as a change order. You might see it as a document that looks very much like just a shortened version of your contract with the city. So the main thing to keep in mind is, regardless of the format, if it makes a formal change to the terms and conditions of the contract, that's going to be an amendment or modification. Now we'll get into a little bit about the different types of procurement that DPS does. And there are 5 main procurement types: small orders, competitive bids, job order contracts, which you might know as JOC, requests for proposals, and requests for qualifications. So we'll go over a little bit about each one of these today. The first being small orders. And small orders is kind of the least formal way that we award contracts. These are used for procuring goods and services up to $250,000. And the main difference between these and the other competitive bids that we'll talk about next are that these do not require formal advertisement. So you won't see these in the newspaper as we formally advertise bids that are over $250,000, but they're still open for anyone to bid upon. You would just need to be watching our e-procurement site for when these get posted. And then if you see one posted and it's one you're interested in, these are still open for anyone to bid on. It's just a less formal process, and these tend to be posted for shorter periods of times than our more formal bid solicitations. So these are a good thing to keep an eye out for if you're interested in some of our contracts for smaller dollar amounts. And any small orders that are over $10,000 are assessed for if there will be MBE and WB compliance goals. Then we also have just kind of what we refer to as our standard competitive bids. So these are our formal bid solicitations for procuring all goods and services that are over $250,000. Unlike small orders where I mentioned we don't formally advertise those, there is formal advertisement for these. So you can find them in the Chicago Tribune or in the Daily. While they are advertised there, just like small orders, these are also on our e-procurement site, so you can look there as well if you prefer to just stay electronic. And our formal competitive bids, the solicitation period for these will vary depending on the solicitation, so you'll always want to look specifically at your bid package for how long it's going to be open for, but generally the bid solicitation period is between 10 to 30 days. Another thing you want to look for is whether the solicitation requires a planned deposit, and if it does, you just want to make sure you're submitting that with your bid. It's becoming less common, but especially because it's less common, we like to just flag that to make sure it's something you're keeping an eye out for. And another thing to keep in mind and to always look for when you're looking at a solicitation is checking to see if there's a pre-bid meeting. So for all of our bids that we do formal solicitations on, if you look in the cover page information, it will say pre-bid meeting, and it will say, one, whether there actually is a pre-bid meeting or if there's no pre-bid meeting. And if there is a pre-bid meeting, there'll be an indication of whether that meeting is optional or mandatory. So if it's mandatory, it's really important that you attend the meeting, because if it's a mandatory pre-bid meeting and you don't attend, your bid will automatically be considered non-responsive if you submit a response to the bid and you didn't attend a mandatory pre-bid meeting, and which will mean that you won't be able to be awarded that bid. So definitely keep an eye on that. But even if there's a pre-bid meeting and it's optional, we always really highly recommend you attend these, because they can be really informative and help you while you're submitting your bids. During the pre-bid meeting, we go over the requirements for the bidding process. So there's a review of the specific specification. There's a chance to address any concerns about the specification. There's going to be a question and answer period where you're able to ask things. So if you know you have a question, it's a really good place to get that answered. Even if you don't have a specific question, sometimes hearing other people's questions get you information you didn't even know that you weren't aware of, or it might prompt you to have a different question. So we always highly encourage, if there is a pre-bid meeting, those can be really helpful to attend. And then depending on what happens in the pre-bid meeting, sometimes we will issue an addendum or clarification regarding the bid documents after that meeting. Now, all of that to say, if there actually is a pre-bid meeting, as I mentioned, there is not always a pre-bid meeting, why we have them often. And if you're looking at your solicitation and you see that there is no pre-bid meeting, we encourage you to make sure that you're doing an in-depth review of the specification as early as possible. So that way you know as early as possible in the solicitation period whether you have any questions you need answered before submitting your bid response. And if you do, every solicitation will always list one of our procurement specialists on it and have their email address as their contact information. So you'll want to reach out to whoever is listed on that solicitation with any questions you have. That person will be different depending on the solicitation. So if you bid on one, you don't want to assume that same specialist is going to be your contact for a future solicitation. You just want to make sure you're looking at your specific documents because that will be the only person who will be permitted to respond on questions. Another few things to make sure you're keeping in mind if you're going to submit your bid is when you're reviewing the documents, you want to make sure that you review them very carefully and you make sure that any required information is filled in. If there's anything that says it needs to be signed, that you sign it and that it's signed by someone who has authority to sign on behalf of your company. You also want to make sure there are a few documents that always require a notary. So you want to make sure if that's required, that you have the documents notarized. And the reason we kind of emphasize this so much is if there is something that's required with your bid and it's not filled in or it's not signed properly and it's a requirement, your bid could be rejected as non-responsive if you don't meet those requirements. So you definitely want to make sure you're doing a careful look. And if you do have any questions, as I mentioned, you can reach out to that procurement specialist who is listed in the bid solicitation with those questions if you're not sure about something you're filling out. And that's your best chance to make sure that when you submit your bid, you can submit it with confidence that you filled everything out correctly. Two other things to just keep in mind before you click submit on your bid is checking one, if there is a bid bond or deposit required. This comes up most often in our construction contracts, but it can come up on other contracts as well. So it's always a good idea to check and make sure you see whether that's a requirement or not. If it is, it won't exceed usually 10% of the contract amount. And there'll be a specification about regarding what form that bid bond or deposit should be submitted in. So you want to make sure you submit it in the proper form. And then one big thing to keep in mind is just making sure that you submit your bid timely on the bid opening date. Your solicitation packet will always say what that bid opening date is. And now that we have an electronic system, sometimes people run into issues with submitting, especially if it's their first time submitting. The system might be new and unfamiliar, especially in that case whenever it's your first bid. And we always recommend that you build in some buffer time and are not submitting right up until the bid opening date, because if you run into any problems, we do have a tech team that's contact information is listed in the solicitations and on our e-procurement site who is available and ready to help you. But if you're submitting at the last minute, there's a chance that they might not be able to help you in time. And if you try to submit after the bid opening date, we won't be able to accept your bids. And we never like people to be turned away. So we always recommend making sure you build in a little buffer time for if you have any technical issues to make sure we can help you get those resolved and you can get your bid in on time by the bid opening date. When it does become time for bid opening, our bid openings occur Monday through Fridays at 11 a.m. and they take place in our bid and bod room in City Hall. They are also streamed via YouTube if you prefer to watch electronically. And at the bid opening, the bids are opened and read aloud, and they are also tabulated. So during this time, the bid tabulation and the bid documents are reviewed for accuracy and completeness. And then usually approximately 24 hours after the bid opening, you'll be able to view those bid tabulations online. And after the bids are open, there's a determination made about who the lowest responsive and responsible bidder is. And that will be who is recommended for award of the contract. And when we talk about responsiveness and responsibility, responsiveness gets to essentially whether you followed all of the instructions in the bid. So as I've kind of been emphasizing, making sure everything's filled out properly, signed correctly, anything that's required with the bid is submitted, that all gets to whether your bid's responsive. Responsibility is going to depend a little bit upon what the specific solicitation is, but that's going to get to essentially whether you are a fit for that contract. So an example of when you might be found to be a non-responsible bidder might be if you are bidding on a very large commercial construction contract and they ask for you to give references for similar contracts, and maybe you've only worked on small residential construction. It might be found that you're not responsible with respect to that one particular bid because your experience doesn't quite fit with what that bid is for. But that finding would only be made with respect to that one specific bid solicitation. Just because if you were found non-responsible on one solicitation, it wouldn't necessarily mean another solicitation you wouldn't be responsible for. But once we find who the lowest responsive and responsible bidder is, there'll be a recommendation that the contract is awarded to that bidder. And at that point, the bid will be packaged with any insurance information, if there was a performance and payment bond, and then they will be routed for signature and approval. And you will have, for any solicitation as the bidder, you would have already signed the documents when you submitted them. So the city will just countersign those documents if you're awarded the contract, and what you submitted as your bid solicitation package will become your actual contract. For the competitive bid, there won't be any additional negotiations with the city for those. Then, so the last group of slides we've all been talking about just our standard formal bid solicitations. Another procurement type we have is a subset of our competitive bids, which is our job order contracts or job contracts. So just like the other competitive bids we've talked about, these do go to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, but they're a little different from the standard competitive bids, because for these, there's firm fixed pricing and it's still competitively bid out. But unlike the other solicitations, there's going to be an indefinite quantity on the contract. So instead of having specific quantities listed like our other competitive bids do, there'll be a minimum and maximum spend for these contracts. And the reason these are set up this way is these are for small and medium-sized construction jobs for the city. So all our large construction jobs will still be handled by their own separate solicitations. But for a lot of the small and medium-sized construction projects where work tends to be repetitive and similar amongst different projects, we often use our job contracts instead. So when you're bidding on these, you would see a pricing book with lists of a bunch of different types of jobs that come up in construction projects. And then there'll be certain pricing next to it and a spot for you to bid and price adjustment factor on those projects. So for instance, if you bid an adjustment factor of 2 and you were awarded this contract and the item you were then asked to perform a job where you bid that adjustment factor of 2, you'd multiply whatever price was in the book by 2, and that's how much you would be paid for that specific job. So that's the main difference between our other contracts. You'll see set quantities and you won't see the same minimum and maximum value. These, if you're awarded it, you'll essentially know you'll just be granted some form of work between the minimum value and the maximum value of the contract. Our next procurement type is the first that we're talking about that is not a competitive bid, and that is our requests for proposals or RFPs. And this is a method we use to solicit proposals to implement new projects that require professional services. And essentially, the city relies on this when we don't have our own in-house technical experts or resources to implement projects or services that require professional services. So unlike in a competitive bid, I had mentioned what you sign when you submit your bid will become your actual contract. In these, they're a little different, where we will put out an advertisement that has project objectives and a really general scope of services, but not every detail of the scope of services is going to be in the request for proposals. Instead, in your response, you'll submit back a proposal that kind of fills in the details of how you would complete the work that's described in the scope of services the city puts out in the RFP. And then based on your proposals, there'll be an evaluation of the different proposals submitted. And those evaluations will be based on certain criteria. The criteria will always be listed in the RFP, as well as any weights that are given to the different criteria. So you'll know if certain things are weighted heavier than others. And the biggest difference between competitive bidding and this is where low price is the real controlling factor. In competitive bids, low price is only one of the factors for the request for proposals. So ultimately, we award to the highest rated and ranked respondent or respondents. And that could be the lowest priced proposal, but it might be one that's higher priced, but based on the other evaluation criteria, it ended up with a higher ranking than another proposal. And then the last main procurement type we have is requests for qualifications or RFQs. And this is a solicitation method we use to solicit qualifications from companies with a high degree of technical expertise and knowledge regarding specific disciplines. So this is different from the other procurement types we've talked about as well, because in everything we've talked about so far, there's at least a general scope of services for the work that we're soliciting. And these we're basing award on specific qualifications. And if you're awarded a contract, you'll be essentially pre-qualified to build a vendor pool, and that will respond to future task orders on individual projects. So at the time the RFQ goes out, we won't have those specific projects lined up. But if you are awarded a master contract, there then will be task orders issued later that have specific scope of services, and those will all go out to the different vendor pools that we have that have been pre-qualified, and you'll be able to respond to those specific task orders. So the evaluations for awarding these are based on qualifications and technical competence. And these come up on a few different things for the city, but most commonly they come up on our A&E design contracts and certain consulting categories. Now, regardless of which procurement type you're responding to, you will almost always be required to submit an economic disclosure statement or EDS. So our EDS address different disclosures about ownership, and they essentially, this is a document that tells us whether we're able to do business with certain entities. It tells information not about only ownership, it tells about if there are any legal issues with the company, different things about their finances. And this is a requirement almost always, but your solicitation packet will indicate if you need to fill one out. And one important thing to keep in mind is we require the EDS not only for the prime contractor, but we also require it for any legal entity that owns more than a 7.5% interest in the applicant firm. They also need to file an EDS. So just an important thing to keep in mind. And then everything we've been talking about so far is really on the contract administration side of DPS, but we also have our contracting equity side, which has a certification and compliance unit. So we're going to kind of shift over to discussing that aspect of DPS. So with respect to certification, the city certifies in 6 different categories listed here. We do MBE, WBE, BEPDE, DBE, ACDBE, and VBE certification with the city. And the eligibility requirements for all of these certifications vary depending on which certification you're applying to. And you're able to go, our website is a good place as a starting point if you're looking to be certified in one of these particular areas. But there are a few requirements that are common amongst all those 6 certification types. One being that the business needs to be at least 51% owned by the qualifying group that you're applying to be certified in. So if you are applying to be an MBE, you will need to be at least 51% owned and controlled by qualifying minorities. If you're applying to be a WBE, you need to be at least 51% owned and controlled by women, etc. for each different certification type. For each type of certification, you also need to be a small business and you need to be considered independent and viable in accordance with our regulations. And this list here, I won't read off the citations for you, but as Jackie mentioned, this will be available for you after the presentation, and these citations, if you want to go back to, if you're specifically looking to pull up more information about the specifics of MBE, WBE, or DBE participation, you can pull up these specific references to get a little more information about them. And in addition to being certified yourself, it's good to keep in mind for MBE, WBE, and DBE in particular, that we have MBE, WBE, and DBE goals on most of our contracts. And to count towards those goals, the MBE, WBE, or DBE that you're using needs to be performing a commercially useful function. And what that means is the firm must be responsible for executing a distinct element of the work of the contract, and it needs to be carried out by actually performing, managing, and supervising the work involved or fulfilling responsibilities as a joint venture. So that's really the very specific definition, but it essentially gets to the certified firm you're trying to count towards the goal needs to be performing meaningful work on the contract. They can't just kind of be listed and not be contributing in a meaningful way to the work that's being performed under the contract. And anytime we have MBE, WBE, DBE, or even BBE goals on a contract, the city's expectation is that you will always reach those goals on the contract. However, we do know sometimes things come up that make it difficult to meet those goals. If you ever do find yourself in a situation where you think you qualify for a reduction or a waiver of those MBE or WBE goals, whether it's while you're performing the contract, you're substantially completed the contract, or you're closing out the contract, you need to make sure that you're putting in a request to the CPO in writing to have a reduction or waiver of those goals. And when those are examined, what the CPO looks for is whether you have made good faith efforts to meet your MBE and WBE utilization goals. And based on whether you have made good faith efforts, you'll make a determination regarding whether your goals will be reduced or waived. In addition to certification, TPS also conducts contract monitoring and compliance. And one of the things we monitor, I've touched on already, and if that's that we monitor the actual utilization of MBEs, WBEs, and DBEs that are listed on your compliance plans when you're awarded a contract. We also ensure that you're complying with the Chicago Residency Ordinance and with any equal employment opportunity commitments you make on contracts. And the next couple of slides, we'll kind of go into what the Chicago Residency Ordinance is and what those equal employment opportunity commitments are if you're not familiar with them. So the first is the Chicago Residency Ordinance, and this applies to construction contracts that are valued at $100,000 or more and are funded by the city. And what it does is it requires that 50% of the total work hours performed under the contract be performed by actual residents of the city of Chicago. And then 7.5% of those work hours need to be performed by project area residents. And who qualifies as a project area resident will vary depending on the solicitation. And any contract that does have requirements under the Chicago Residency Ordinance will have a map in it that shows you what the project area is. And even though that area will vary depending on the solicitation, it essentially will be the area that kind of surrounds the construction project that solicitation is for. Then we also have equal employment opportunity commitments, and these are designed to promote equality of opportunity for minorities and female personnel on city-funded construction projects. So on these, bidders are invited to propose their own minority and female employee utilization goals. And there's a canvassing formula in the construction contracts this can be used on that will help you figure out that goal. And I've mentioned that we monitor compliance and want to make sure we definitely touch base on how you actually do achieve compliance. So there are a few different ways you can achieve compliance. The first being if you're working towards MBE, WBE, or DBE goals, if you yourself as the prime contractor are an MBE, WBE, or DBE, any work that you do will count towards those goals. You can also joint venture with an MBE, WBE, or WBE, or DBE, to achieve those goals. You can subcontract out work to a different MBE, WBE, or DBE to reach the goals. And lastly, you can also purchase materials used to perform the contract from one or more MBE, WBEs, or DBEs. And although you can achieve compliance in all of these different ways, if you're the prime contractor, you're going to be the one who's responsible for reporting on compliance with your different goals. So that will include submitting to the city any monthly subcontractor payment certification forms, weekly certified payroll, and waivers of lien. Then today, I want to just briefly touch upon the different programs and bid incentives that the city has. Today, we're just going to kind of do a brief overview so you know the city has these. We also do a separate presentation that's solely on bid incentives and programs. If you are interested in learning more than the overview today, you can also look online at those resource guides that Jackie mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. There's one entirely on our incentives and programs. So this slide here lists out the different programs the city has that can help you kind of make the most of any contract that you're awarded to the city. And on this next slide, we have a list of all of our different bid incentives. If you're not familiar with our incentives, we encourage you to become familiar with them. They can be very helpful in our award of contracts because they all will have different bid incentive amounts. But what our bid incentives do is when you're bidding on a contract for solely the evaluation purpose, the bid incentives will take a certain percentage away from your base bid, but you will still be paid whatever you bid on for the contract. So for instance, if you qualify for an incentive that's a 2% bid incentive, for solely the bid evaluation, 2% of your overall base bid, your base bid will be reduced by 2% for that bid evaluation purpose, although you will still be ultimately provided your full base bid amount if you are awarded the contract. And because some of our bids, when we're looking for the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, do end up being very close between bidders, sometimes the bid incentive might be the difference between the lowest and second lowest bidder. So we do encourage you to become familiar with them, and if you do qualify for them, to apply for them when you are bidding on our different contracts. And then another thing that's a little newer to the city is our enhanced diversity reporting requirements. So we just like to make sure they are on everyone's radar. Under these enhanced requirements, we now require our contractors to submit projections regarding when and to what extent they're planning to use certified firms in the contract. And if you end up kind of below the projected usage, we have you include an explanation and recovery plan for how you'll get back on track to be on track to hit your projected usage for those certified firms. We also require annual reports for our business diversity programs. So you'll report annually regarding whether you have a business diversity program, or even if you don't have one, you'll report that you do not have such a program. And in those reports, we have information regarding the expenditure on goods and services from minority-owned firms and women-owned firms during the prior calendar year. And then last, just want to go over, you've probably heard me mention our DPS website a few times throughout this presentation. And if you're looking for additional resources beyond the presentation today, our DPS website is a really good place to start. We have all of our awarded contracts as well as their modifications on that site. We have different payment information, our bid tabulation for our different bids. We have a searchable MBE and WBE directory. There's more information about our bid incentives and programs. And you can also find our different regulations on our website. So it's always a really good starting point anytime you have a question regarding procurement. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jackie for the questions for any questions that you have.
All right. We hope that all of you got that information. We know it's probably a lot to consume in a short amount of time. So if you would like to re-see this presentation, you can do that by going online tomorrow, and you will be able to see it in the on YouTube at youtube.com/Chicago DPS. And once you get to the DPS landing page, all you have to do is click on 2023 playlist. I'll put that information in the chat for you so that you have it. But we do have a few questions, so I'm going to get to it so Courtney can answer them for you. The first question is, as a trucking hauling company, what contracts and terms should we be looking for?
So a good place to look is on our buying plan. At the start of the presentation, Jackie had mentioned that it sets out all of the major contracts that we're planning to advertise this year. So that can give you a good idea of what you might want to keep an eye on. You can also be watching our e-procurement site in general for if there are any small orders that wouldn't necessarily be in that buying plan that come up during the year. But those are the best spots to be looking to keep an eye on what would fit your company best.
And let me reiterate for those of you that joined us a little later than when I gave the initial overview, I'm not going to the chat box to look for your questions. You have to put your questions in the Q&A so that I have all of them there and I can ask them to our guest speaker. And so if you would go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, click on the three dots, or if you see the Q&A, go ahead and put your question in there and we'll get it answered. The second question is, greetings. We are a WBE and a WOSB medical nursing firm. Where do we search for small orders?
So those will all be on our e-procurement site. And those, the posting time can vary for how long those are posted. Sometimes they're posted still up to 30 days, like our larger bids, but sometimes they're only posted for a few days. So I would recommend just keeping a close eye on our e-procurement site, and they will pop up on there as they're available. And if you see anything you'd like to bid on, anyone can bid on those. There just isn't the formal advertisement for those. So that's the spot you want to look in.
And then the next question, do all bids have to be at City Hall? I'm not sure what that question actually means, so I will ask that person if they could give us some more details. But do all bids have to be at City Hall? Are you meaning the ones that we televise? Because we were doing televised, I should say it's the webinar, just like we're on here now. We would do our bid openings that way as well, virtually. So I don't know if that's what you're meaning, but if that person can go in the Q&A and give us further information, we'll come back to that. Okay, the question was answered. All right. How much time after service is performed that vendors receive payment from the city of Chicago?
So each contract will indicate the payment window. Generally, it tends to be 60 days after services, but each contract will have different specifications regarding how often invoices are submitted. And usually it's 60 days from whenever your invoices are submitted to the city.
And is the county's MBE certification acceptable?
We do have reciprocity with the county on our certification. So if you are certified as an MBE with the county, that will count for the city as well.
Are there any medical nurse staff contracts awarded by the city of Chicago? And I will say for Courtney on that one with the buying plan is going to be your Bible in the sense of we give an 18-month, a 15-month forecasting of what's out there. So if there are medical contracts that are out on the market, generally you can find it in the buying plan. Sometimes the department asks us to do a special DPS alert for that. So if you're not signed up for DPS alerts, I advise you to do that because sometimes they ask us to send out something special. And then sometimes that department will do that as well. So I don't know, Courtney, if you want to weigh in any more than that.
No, that was perfect.
Okay, where will I find the consulting category? In the buying plan? If you're referring to in the buying plan, under the description, it will say whether it's a consulting job or not. And consulting jobs generally fall under professional services. So generally, that's how you kind of see them in the buying plan. Under the department, everything is under the agency where that has the need. And then under the agency, it is split out into each of the opportunities and when they are due to go on the market. And in the description, you will find more information. But let me just say this. I would do my homework just like I would do a homework for if I was looking for a new job and was interviewing with a new company. We are only in the buying plan giving you a snapshot of what is, out there and being bidded on or going to be bid on. You will have to go to that agency and then that agency's procurement page and look for that particular item so that you can get full details on what that is requiring you to have. Okay. So I would suggest you do it that way because it gives you like more detail. If you have e-procurement, you can go into e-procurement and put that item in and it will show you information that it's looking for. If it's in the bidding process for that, it gives you all the details there that it's looking for, but you have to do your research on that. So I would say if you've never been in there, peruse it before you're looking for a bid opportunity because you want to make sure that you have all the details before you start bidding on something. How do WBE companies get on the directory?
So if you are certified with the city, you should automatically become part of our directory.
Do subcontractors have to be certified?
To subcontract, you do not have to be certified, but the only way that if a prime is trying to subcontract with someone to meet their MBE, WBE, or DBE goals, you'll need to be a certified firm to count towards those goals. But primes can certainly subcontract with non-certified firms. It just won't be counting towards those goals.
And so the next question basically asked this person's company is mega certified on a lot of different points. And they have learned a lot through your presentation, Courtney, about RFPs and and they're asking if there are people we can reach out to get started on those contracts. Well, first of all, I would say we do have a workshop for JOC. It's called Chicago Building Chicago, and understanding or learning more about the JOC program. So I would say, and that should be coming up pretty soon. So I would say look out for that, register for that workshop, because our JOC person that works with the city of Chicago is the one that presents that workshop along with one of our representatives here at DPS. And so you will learn all the information you need to know about how to get started with JOC programs. Second of all, we have a workshop as well, how to respond to a RFP. And that is done through our contract side. So I would just say keep, or you can go through there now and see when they're offered. But go back online and go to DPS training, chicago.gov/DPS training, and go to the Google Calendar. And in there has all of the dates in the workshops that we will be offering. Now, the only time that those will not be offered on those dates is if we have to cancel them due to the vendor fair coming up and it's meshing with the dates of the vendor fair, or we had to cancel for some other unforeseen reason. But you can go in there and register in advance for those workshops, and in those workshops they tell you how to get started, because there's not like really one person who can say call this person and they can get you started on that contract. So they will tell you the process that you have to go through, and you can begin that process. The last question that I have in this spot is, I'm a woman-owned business but need to be certified. I'm in the business of manufacturing high visibility safety wear and other types of items produced outside of Chicago in the suburb. I am wondering if the city of Chicago has opportunities for these items. Well, I don't know if you want to take this one, Courtney, but all I can say is you can go through again our buying plan and see if there are any agencies in there that are looking for your items. And then, because generally, if they're looking for things like that, they will either send it out that way, or the next way to really find that out is our next networking event will be the vendor fair. And we generally at the vendor fair have over 128 different organizations, whether it is city agencies, city sister agencies, or it is state, federal, or our CIST agencies, or we have some of the folks that work with us often, which we have asked them to partner with some of the smaller businesses to show them how working on a contract kind of works. And so we have those folks that join us as well, and we introduce them to smaller folks. So you will get a chance to network and talk with various people that might need your product. And you at that time can make your introductions and take it from there with them. We are, Courtney or I, are in the position right now of basically saying who may need your product or not. We don't want to discourage you either, but we want to make sure that you are seen And to be seen is to come to those types of events. So you can either go and look at our DPS alert and see any of the different fairs and symposiums and summits and different things that we know that's going on with our sister agencies, state agencies, or various partners, and then go to those. Or you can, come to our vendor fair and make your introduction there and see how many cards or things that you get there, and then you'll have an idea who needs your services. I hope that answered your question. And I think we have gone through all of the questions that are here. If anyone else has any additional questions, feel free to send them now or forever hold your peace. If not, I will say thank you so much to Courtney for taking us through procurement fundamentals. We want all of you to be able to work with city agencies and our city partners and departments. So to do that, I hope this has been an introductory, if not giving you more insight on what you'll need if you did not know some of the things that was offered today, and that you will take some of our other workshops to give you more clarity on what you need to know so that you can bid your best bid and be awarded some of these opportunities as well. Because there's money to be had, and we hope all of you are able to get a piece of that in some form or fashion. So with that said, I don't think that I posted a question, but it was directed to the presenter. Oh, I told you, gotta put it in here. Oh, when is the vendor fair? The actual vendor fair. Sir, if you could put your question in the Q&A panel and just send it to everyone, I'll be able to get it. When is the vendor fair? The vendor fair is going to be late summer. We're trying to knock down a date as soon as I can get that date and the venue set. It will be either in, if this helps, June, July, or August. And when I say August, the first part of August, the first week of August. If not, it will be mid-July or the ending of July or the end of June. So if that gives you further help, that's what we're shooting for. We're just trying to find a venue, I should say, that can accommodate us and get us the spacing that we need. And then we will definitely be blasting something out in the DPS alerts, and you will see more signage and different things for that. So thanks for asking, but I say sign up for DPS alerts so that you will always know, because it always goes out in the DPS alerts. So with that said, I don't know. Oh, geez, this person, you might need to see her on one-on-one basis. So can I ask, in the interest of time for today, the person that put in the 3 questions at the end, I will be more than glad if Courtney, if you would be able to contact him directly, and we will get an answer. So if you can send me your telephone number, we will have someone answer these questions for you and get right back to you with that. Okay. So you can send that just directly to me. And I am Jackie Umbles, just in case you didn't see that. You can send that to the host directly. What is the vendor fair April 18th, 19th about then? I don't know whose vendor fair that is. That's why I don't like them using, so I'm changing the name of what we're going to call the city, but you will always see City of Chicago before whatever we create here at the Department of Procurement Services, because we do this on behalf of the entire city. So I don't know what April 18th or 19th is, so I can't answer that directly. But if you look in the DPS alert, you will see the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services is giving or hosting this event, and you in the DPS alert that we send out. So again, sign up for the DPS alerts, and you'll never go wrong with what's going on with the city. Now, everybody else, they may be a city entity that's having something and calling it the vendor fair, but I don't know what it is. And sir, we will get a hold of you and get your questions answered, but thank you for sending them to us. So we are sorry we ran over about 10 minutes, but it was a great conversation. Lots of questions. That's like a lot about what we like to see. And thank you for attending today. Be safe, be careful, and we will definitely hope to see you at another one of these workshops, as well as when I send out the information for the vendor fair, you will be able to attend that as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Courtney. And we will see you next time. Have a great and wonderful rest of your afternoon.